Minister, during the course of the pandemic, the circumstances, I suppose, shone a light on domestic violence and its prevalence in our community, and I'm proud that our government throughout responded extremely well and promptly and provided full and increased funding. I suppose I lament that the conversation needed to happen at all. It is really pretty horrific that anyone would be frightened within particularly an intimate relationship and within the confines of their own home. However, I am glad that it is now out in the open, that this is now something that can be discussed openly, that it is high up on all of our political agendas, and I think we have cross-party agreement on that. The taboo subject, it's been broken as a taboo subject, and we also have the stereotyping of victims and perpetrators has been broken insofar as it's across all sectors of society. There's no particular profile that is signals someone who is either a perpetrator or a victim, and from that point of view, I think that's all good, and maybe will create a context and encourage victims to come forward, and I would really encourage that. The report tracking the shadow of the pandemic, the story from March to August, published by Safe Ireland, has some really stark figures, and I'm going to very boringly read them into the record of the House, some of them, but because I think that we need to pause and take them on board, that in a 6-month period that we had 3,450 women and 589 children contact the domestic violence services for the very first time. That on average that we had 1,970 women and 411 children receive support every month. That there were nearly 34,000 helpline calls answered. That's an average of 184 calls per day. And that on average 191 women and 288 children were living in domestic violence accommodation each month. And what is really quite frightening is that 1,351 requests for refuge could not be met due to lack of space, and the thinking behind that, I think, of what the consequences of that lack of space is really quite frightening and quite horrific for them. So the services have worked tirelessly, they worked ceaselessly to find accommodation within the community. The numbers looking for support increased again month on month. July and August were the busiest months, which was surprising, yet while circumstances were a little bit more relieved for all of our living and moving around, at the same time the figures still increased. And then the services, I think, have been extraordinary throughout the pandemic in that they adapted to the lockdown overnight. That and the statistics on that are 33,624 phone support sessions were held. That's extraordinary. That 575 video support sessions, 8,300 in-person support sessions, 2,000 helpline emails, 3,500 texts, and over 1,000 online chat messages. And that focuses on women and children. And I'm always very mindful of men that are in domestic violence situations. And over the course of the number of years that I have worked and been around this area, I'm very mindful of just how particularly vulnerable and difficult it is for men in domestic violence situations. So the increase, I suppose I'm mindful also that we don't have the figures for the second lockdown and how difficult that must have been. And as we come into Christmas, this time of year, every year, we run campaigns to say, there is supports there for domestic violence, because Christmas, unfortunately, while on one hand we're talking about families getting together and everything that goes with that, at the same time we are also mindful of the violence that accompanies Christmas and the horror that is in some homes. I worked as a counselling psychologist for a number of years before coming to the bar, and counselled both victims and perpetrators. And in that, I had one incident in a counselling room, in a reflective counselling session, where a perpetrator, in the context and appropriately within the context, I needed to challenge a particular thing, and he instantly lost it. I got the tiniest of insight into how frightening it must be that in that moment I was locked into a counselling room, but that wasn't, you know, my husband, it wasn't my partner, the father of my children, the home that I was obliged to live in. So I can only imagine, and I shudder to think of what it must be like coming up to Christmas. And so it's in that context, Minister, I just want to raise with you one particular organisation called Saoirse, and their acting CEO is my party colleague and a great champion of women's rights, Ellen O'Malley Dunlop. Saoirse is an excellent service providing community support and prevention service. They work in a geographic area from West Wicklow all the way through to Dublin 12, and they have 2 short-term refuge accommodation for women and children suffering abuse, and at the moment they're full to capacity. They have 11 women and 17 children in residence. They run a 24-hour helpline, and their refuge is staffed 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. They have day caller services, they do court accompaniment, they have therapeutic rooms. So they just have the most amazing service, and I suppose I want to commend them as a service that I particularly know and am familiar with their work. Commend them and the hard work that they've done. Do I not have 10 minutes? 6. 6? Oh, we had 10 the last time. Oh, apologies.
6 minutes for...
Okay, well, I'll wind up really quickly anyway. I suppose that the issue is you lobbied for, and very well, you got the increased funding. And I suppose we just need clarification for all the services under Safe Ireland. How is that funding going to be allocated? Are all of the services that have been providing, the likes of Saoirse, they're looking for clarification on the onward, how that increased lot of funding that's gone to TUSLA, how that's going to be allocated to all of those organisations, and would really appreciate clarification on that. So thank you very much. Thank you.